Welcome to the Financial Finesse Podcast, where we'll be discussing tips on how to handle your money and life with skill and style. Your host, Cathy Curtis, CFP, has been helping make finance accessible and intriguing for women for almost 20 years. You'll get savvy, actionable ideas listening to her conversations with some of the coolest and smartest women on the planet. And now, here's your host, Cathy Curtis.
Hello, I'm Cathy Curtis, host of the Financial Finesse Podcast and founder of Curtis Financial Planning in Oakland, California. If you don't know about me or my firm, I am an advisor who specializes in the finances of independent women, single women, women head of household, and women breadwinners. I think you will enjoy this next episode of my podcast. It's the first one of season 4. And in it, I interview the management team from Democracy Investments, CEO Julie Kane, Chief Investment Officer Chris Brown, and Chief Economist Rick Rikoski. These 3 individuals have decades of financial services experience and unique backstories, all of which influence them to collaborate in creating an investment management firm that's committed to advancing democracy worldwide. And I really believe this conversation couldn't have been more timely, given Russia's ongoing attack on Ukraine and the explicit dangers of authoritarian government. Democracy Investments' mission is to incentivize democracy by directing capital towards the economies of democratic nations and away from authoritarianism. By holding an exclusive license agreement with the publishers of The Economist, the team leverages The Economist's Democracy Index to measure and rank countries globally based on their democratic values and practices. They then use this information to construct a diversified international index, which is the basis for their flagship ETF, the Democracy International Fund. In this episode, we discuss the genesis of the firm as well as their investment philosophy and approach. We also talk specifically about Russia's war in Ukraine and more broadly about the global trend towards authoritarianism. Be sure to listen all the way through to the end as we discuss why investors who want to make an impact with their investment dollars may want to consider the Democracy International Fund. With that, I hope you enjoy my conversation as much as I did, and be sure and check the show notes at curtisfinancialplanning.com for more information and resources related to this interesting episode. Hi, Julie, Rick, and Chris. Thanks so much for joining me on my podcast, Financial Finesse. I'm really excited to hear about your fund, the Democracy International Fund.
Thanks for having us, Cathy. It's an honor to be here.
Great. So I'm really curious to start. What was it, a passion project for the 3 of you? What drove you to build this fund together? Where did you meet? I know you all have really interesting backgrounds. And if Julie, maybe you could start and let us know about that.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Cathy. It was about a year and a half ago that the 3 of us individually were watching what's going on in the world with the incredible overinvestment into authoritarian states that we were seeing by the large index providers. And we were trying to figure out a way to undo that. And we started down a path, should it be a more actively managed strategy? And then when we stepped back, we thought, no, a passive strategy would be better. And what would be a more neutral way to measure democracy and stop the over-indexing? And Rick had been role modeling coronavirus death rates using the Economist Democracy Index, so that it was literally on his desk as we were brainstorming. And we decided to see if that as a metric would work, one of the most robust measures of democracy in the world. And we were able to secure an exclusive license, and then we were off to the races. So Chris and I met way back when. We were actually together during 9/11 working at Autodesk Ventures. And we had been brainstorming on a general impact investing strategy for a while, but really couldn't find the right strategy that could be both high impact and have the numbers to support it. So when this came along, we got together and decided the state of the world is not going in a good direction, and this would be a strategy that could compete with the big providers. So we're a year old now, and I have to say it's an honor every day to get up and focus on this mission with two of the people I respect most in the world. And here we are 1 year later, and excited to be with you today.
Congrats, that's really cool. So it's very timely, obviously, given the state of the world. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure I don't think you predicted what was going to happen with Ukraine, did you? Did you see this coming, or talk about that a little bit? And I'm sure it's helped you to get some more focus on your fund from investors. Yes,
absolutely. Actually, I'll let Rick speak to that.
Sure.
It depends which aspect of Ukraine in terms of what we were predicting. We were actually predicting pretty early on that Putin was going to try to flush as many refugees as he could into the surrounding countries. You kind of saw that as a practice run last year in Belarus, where the Belarusians stacked the border and were trying to push refugees from the Middle East into Poland. And the reason we were concerned about that is that over the last decade, refugees entering Europe have caused considerable xenophobia, the rise of nationalism, and the rise of dictators who gravitated towards Putin's sphere. So that was the concern that we had pre-war, and I think that Putin's behavior to date has been consistent with that.
Yeah.
The bigger picture, one concern I have actually is that Ukraine is masking the broader decline of democracy globally.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd asked me 5 years ago, what are the top 4 democracies on earth? I would have said India, the US, Indonesia, and Brazil. And today, India is trending towards authoritarianism with Modi. They're siding with Putin in Ukraine. Brazil.
Are they taking a strong stand on that?
They're taking oil. They're not cutting off trade or sanctions or anything like that.
Yeah.
Bolsonaro in Brazil came out in support of Putin. His government then kind of backed off a little bit off of that, and they're taking a position of neutrality. But Brazil is certainly tending towards autocracy. And then in Indonesia, the Indonesian president, independent of Ukraine, is simply trying to extend his own presidential term. And that's a country which has had some authoritarian issues for sure in the past. So 3 out of 4 of the top 4 democracies are seriously regressing. And the US is bending but not breaking. We're doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. So that is a big concern, while at the same time you see Putin helping out the president of Kazakhstan when he's got a pro-democracy movement, helping out Lukashenko in Belarus, helping Viktor Orban behind the scenes with disinformation. So
and what about
at the end of
France? Isn't Putin backing the candidate in France too at this point?
Yes, he seems to be.
Yeah.
2022 could be a very bad year for democracy, regardless of how things end in Ukraine.
Right. So, okay. So given that these shifts you're talking about, do things shift within the fund because of that in the weightings of the different countries, or is it not that you don't make that quick of changes probably?
Well, first of all, we're passive, and that means that people can't come to me and say, please change my country. And that's good because it undermines our ability to be corrupt. Right. Instead, we're slave to the democracy index. And so when the democracy index updates, and they only update it annually, but when they do, we will change our weightings.
Okay. So this is a question that came up for me, and I'm sure it will for other people interested in your fund, is why not just not have any authoritarian countries in the fund? So that goes to your methodology and not wanting, so explain that, because I think that's going to be a big question.
Okay, so there's 2 different answers to that. Both of them give you the same answer, though. One of them is having an arbitrary cliff is a little tough because the democracy index it's a little noisy year to year. So you can have a country jumping back and forth across the cliff all the time. So you're, divesting, investing. It's not a really good strategy for a fund. Okay. But on top of that, we're trying to create an economic incentive for authoritarians to reform. And so because we invest proportionally to how democratic they are, if they become even a little bit more democratic, they get a little bit more money. If anyone becomes less democratic, we withdraw money. And that's our carrot and stick. And so if we're not engaged, if we're not investing in a country, if we're not investing in every single company in that country, we don't have the engagement and the ability to influence behavior.
Okay. So it is true that someone who invests in your fund is using their money to promote democracy, and you feel that will cause change. I mean, it has to be a lot of money, right? But a small investor can feel good that they're doing their part.
They can feel good from a couple. Sorry, Rick, to jump in. They can feel good from a couple of reasons. I mean, part of which we've gone into some of the more geopolitical stuff that Rick has gone into. But I mean, basically, authoritarian COVID is certainly done its damage, and it's shifting supply chains. All of the stuff that has been going on now between China and Taiwan, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, whether it's what's going on in Turkey right now with their incredible inflation. And serious problems there. You asked earlier if we saw any of this coming. It was basically we saw the problems of authoritarianism and the problems that some policy errors would start to creep in as they became more aggressive, and that those would eventually catch up with them at some particular point. So yes, absolutely, investors can feel great that they're promoting democracy. So we think it makes both sense from both the head and the heart perspective.
Okay. And just for the listeners who don't know what the difference between those indexes, could you explain that? There's an international index that's got all the countries in it, and then there's the index that you're using. Could you just?
MSCI, MSCI has an all country world index, and we use X the United States because we take that out of the equation for an international stock portfolio. All of the securities in that are large and mid cap securities that are market cap weighted. Roughly about 2,500 names in there. We basically take an equivalent of those two, another equivalent of those two indices, and simply reweight it using the democracy index. So in my example earlier, Taiwan Semiconductor is your number one holding. We take the the market cap weighting of Taiwan Semi times the Taiwan democracy score. That gives you a product. You do that for every stock in the index, and then normalize so that everything adds up to 100 again. And that's the Democracy International Index. We then use that index as the underlying basis for the Democracy International ETF, where we're doing index replication in that particular part.
And that's your proprietary part right there, that final part you just said.
Right,
That's
right. And
correct.
a little more background on the Economist Democracy Index. They've been publishing those scores since 2006, and there are 62 different indicators that go into each country score, and they roll up into things like free and fair elections, political participation, electoral process, and it's quite robust. So back to Rick's point about moving the needle, any country can look up public information, which of those 62 indicators they need to improve to get more capital in our index. Okay.
So another example would be, isn't 10 cent a big holding in a lot of emerging market funds? So it would not be in your fund because it's a Chinese company.
It would be downweighted. It would be tilted down.
It's cut by about 70%.
Okay.
So 10 cent goes from being a large holding to a little bit more of an also ran. Same thing with Alibaba, same thing with all of the big Chinese tech stocks. Again, everything there's about in these indices, there are about 400 to 500 Chinese company names in these indices. And we take all of them down by 70% in the portfolio.
Okay. That's your underweight, that's 70%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Very interesting. Okay. So Taiwan Semiconductor, that begs a question about China invading Taiwan, or, what do you see there? I mean, I'm sure you're well versed on that. What's your opinion? And is there danger there in owning that heavy weighting in Taiwan Semiconductor?
I think China's been watching what's happened in Ukraine, and if nothing else, they're going to wait and see how this plays out before they do anything in Taiwan. I think that they've been fairly impressed by the sanctions that have been leveled on Russia, and I think that has, on some level, credibly deterred China. But we'll see. Okay.
So you're not saying, oh no, that would never happen.
The Chinese have been pretty clear that they want it to happen. The Chinese are also fairly clever in that historically they look and see what, some prior acts, like the Russian invasion, and they see how it played out, and they figure out how they can still achieve their goals without suffering the same, repercussions. One thing that I think that they will probably do with Taiwan is stress that there is no broader potential for conflict. Right? People are worried that the Ukrainian conflict could spill over. China's going to say no. China and Taiwan have had this conflict for a long time. It's a long-standing thing, and it's isolated. And so they'll probably try to lay the groundwork to not have sanctions levied. So it's still in play.
Yeah.
And you can't, and so from a pure product perspective, if the Chinese invaded Taiwan, the cut to China's securities relative to a market cap portfolio will have such a greater impact on that product's performance than what we've got, because we're 30% we're 30% of the weight of the market cap portfolio in China.
Yeah.
We're only slightly overweighted in Taiwan, and Taiwan is a smaller component. So
it would not make that big of a difference to your fund. Yeah. Well, as a financial advisor, I work with individuals, mainly women investors, and I'm always looking for new investments for these people so they can invest with their values. And when Julie contacted me, it really resonated with me right away. I find it so fascinating, and I'm not going to say more about what I'm going to do to adopt it, but because I don't want it to turn into a sales pitch, but I'm happy to see that this fund is out there.
Thank you, Cathy.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about more trends. Rick, it sounds like you are a student of lots of things. And first off, why do you think this movement in authoritarianism in the world? Why now? I mean, Trump maybe had an influence on it. I don't know.
I don't know that it was Trump, actually. I think that some of this is deeper seated. One question that I think is going to have to be answered by the historians was whether we overdid it with the 2014 sanctions. I don't think we really appreciated possibly how damaging they were. They may have been far more damaging than we thought. But there's been a long-term trend. We thought at the end of the Cold War that free markets were going to lead to free societies. And the communist countries gave up a system that simply was not working economically. But they didn't really dispense with authoritarianism. And given a 30-year runway, what we've seen is the development of substantially stronger authoritarian states, which are now, frankly, economically viable when they challenge democracies. Mm-hmm. They're also learning how to link up. So Putin can help the president of Kazakhstan or Belarus, and authoritarians in one state can help authoritarians in another to hold on to power. And one of the real challenges for democracies is that, every so often a democracy is going to have a dictator who shows up. And the challenge for democracies is to get rid of them. But it's going to be a lot harder to get rid of them if the other authoritarians are on the sidelines rooting for them and welcoming them into the brotherhood of authoritarianism.
Give an example of a democratic country that has an authoritarian. Is there?
Well, Viktor Orban in Hungary is certainly a concern. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Modi in India, those guys are all concerning.
And they all then end up supporting each other.
Yeah.
So is it sort of a pact against the U.S. or?
It's a pact against Western democracy.
Yeah.
And if you look at, Asia is really kind of consolidating in a bad way. And, South Korea is beginning to just look like this little appendix of democracy that's just tacked onto Asia. And that's scary.
Mm-hmm. What's your prediction then? What do you see happening? Do you think those countries will get stronger because of all the support they're giving each other? And
I think that
war?
I hope not nuclear war, although all bets are off in Ukraine. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, everything that we have out there to deter nuclear war doesn't apply to Ukraine. So it's a real wild card. I would expect, though, that if the democracies and the authoritarian states kind of divide into different trading spheres, we go back to the first world, second world order you saw during the Cold War. I would expect economic stagnation for what would be the second world.
Okay. What about other trends like so let's talk about ESG. So this is a S&G fund. I think I talked to Julie about that a little bit before.
Yeah, yes and no by those definitions. So some people like to put us in that category as the S&G, but we kind of see ourselves as a whole new category. And we would step back and say, where is the D in ESG? And perhaps you should start with our strategy first, so that you're supporting those countries that are focused on human rights and free and fair elections. And then you can do your ESG screen once you've accounted for democracy. Right.
Okay. But I'm sure it would rank. Oh, well, it does rank. I at least through one lens, I ran it through the Ethos software, and you came out a high B, which is good. So, you know, in that methodology, it is a good ESG fund.
Yeah. Yeah, because democracies are more naturally focused on the same things that are ESG focused. They care more about environmental, they care more about human rights, they care more about governance. But it's not a clean, I wouldn't say it's a clean ESG. We don't fit into that bucket perfectly.
We're not screening out oil and gas company. I mean, again, we're not applying any screens other than overlaying the democracy index on top of the existing companies in the index. The shifts, I think, that Julie alluded to before, again, democracies are going to companies that are in democracies are going to tend to have higher ESG scores because democracies care more about ESG and enforce it. And we humbly submit that democracy is the fundamental. If you want to achieve your ESG goals, democracy is the fundamental medium by which it gets achieved, right? So if you go through, and again, it's all on a relative basis. Nobody is clean in this whole thing. But where are most of the environmental fouls occurring? Are they in democracies? Or are they in authoritarian regimes? I love to use, John Kerry, the Biden's climate czar's quote that the United States could go to net zero emissions and not put a dent in the global problem. Why? Because more authoritarian governments are counterbalancing it. Same thing on the social side with genocide and social tracking and all of the things that are going on that society level. Again, where are they greater? Probably more in democracy. Same thing on the G side in governments. Where are the transparency issues? Where are more of the frauds? Where are more? You can just keep kind of going through. On governance things, are they more prevalent in democracies where you have rule of law, or are they more prevalent in authoritarian regimes where things are a little bit more subjective?
Right.
So all of those things, again, we think that this is the underlying layer that investors need to use if they're ESG investors in order to fully realize their ESG objectives.
Really?
I would just add, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I would just add one thing, which is I think that ESG really is kind of a subset of impact investing. And I think that we fall into the impact investment category pretty cleanly. But there's more than one set of impacts you can be seeking. And we're focused 100% on democracy. And that's fine.
Yeah. And you also could say, like, oil and gas company domiciled in a democratic country is probably going to be working towards better solutions, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, a lot of them are, you can't be so green that you don't see that. And those companies, to make the transition, are going to need money.
Absolutely. So for oil and gas, it's coming out of Saudi Arabia and flowing into countries like Canada and Norway.
Right. So I personally, I like that about that fund, that it's not cutting out companies like that. And I'm hoping that the oil and gas that are in the fund are the good, the ones that are making attempts to change. And
well, to be clear, all the oil companies are in the fund, the good ones and the bad ones. We just overweight towards the good ones.
Yeah.
And the reason is you really can't incentivize, Saudi Arabia if you don't have some money in Aramco.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. This is getting me very clear on your methodology. I I love it. Thank you for sharing all this information. Is there anything else that you want investors to know about your fund? This is your chance to toot the horn.
Well, we're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, ticker symbol DMCY, and you can get more information at www.democracyinvestments.com. Important disclosures are on our fund page. And we encourage investors to do their homework. Look at your portfolio, read your prospectus, see what holdings are in those large index products. Emerging market funds can be up to 30 to 40% in authoritarian states. So I think it's important that what can we do with everything going on in the world and all the trends we've just been discussing. Put your money where your mouth is, and look under the hood and make sure you know what you're investing in, and make sure it aligns with your values, as you mentioned earlier, Cathy. And hats off to you for bringing that focus to your clients. And if we all are more aware, we can help. It is a sort of economic warfare, is the way you could look at it. Let's take the money away from those where all these atrocities are happening. I mean, it goes on. And luckily, there's more awareness in the press around this than there was 5 years ago, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, what about you?
And we think that just given the problems that exist within authoritarians and the way that the world is lining up, and it's not I'll let Rick talk to this a bit more. I don't know if I'm going to call it a new Cold War, but there's certainly two spheres now that are emerging, and one is a more strongman authoritarian sphere, and one is a more democratic one, and those will be at odds about who can generate the more productive economy. My money's on democracies. Otherwise, I'm way late on my plans for global domination.
Oh, I have a question for you. Where would the U.S. rank if this included the U.S., if it was not a ex-U.S.?
Yeah, so the U.S. is a 7.85. So if we were included the U.S., it would be slightly above average tilt towards the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like what percent? What overweight? Do you know that?
On an all world, if we include the U.S. into our product strategy, you're talking about a 4 to 6% overweight on the U.S.
Okay. Versus a 30% overweight to Norway, for example.
They have a little bit higher democracy score.
Wow, interesting.
Well, actually, there's something really interesting there. Why Norway has a higher democracy score. If you look at all the countries on Earth and you rank them by population, there's a pronounced trend towards higher democracy scores as countries get smaller.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I have what I call the prominent democracies, which are the sets. It's a set of democracies who score considerably higher than their peers. And there's actually a very small number of them. And then you kind of get the first big one as you go down in population, the second biggest one. So the prominent democracies are the United States, Japan, Germany, Sweden, Canada, Sweden, Finland, and Norway, right? The United States actually makes the list. And that's because our peers are China, India, Indonesia, and Pakistan.
Yeah.
So we only do above average when you compare us to countries with 5 million people. But it's easy to have a good democracy when you have 5 million people and everyone's agreeing on the simple things. It's very hard to hold together a country of a third of a billion people, yet we're doing it.
Yeah. Really good point. Yeah, it's easy to hold up the Scandinavian countries because how much smaller are they than the US?
Norway's got 5 million people.
And we have?
330 million. So they're 66 times smaller than us.
Yeah. Good role model, but much harder to do in a big country.
Exactly.
Melting pot.
Rick, you want to add anything that you want investors to know?
Well, I think if you invest in an all-world ex-US product, an index product, you should seriously consider us because we've been structured to essentially give very, very similar volatility. And we should look a lot like your benchmark all-world ex-US product. We're trying to be indistinguishable. We've had some beginner's luck and not been indistinguishable for good reasons. But yeah, if you're going to go and invest in one of those all-world ex-US products, look at us, because I think you'll be very happy with what you get. And on top of that, all the other good things happen. And to your question earlier about how much money we need to get to really change things, if we got to be on the order of a Vanguard fund, you would see, for instance, about 1 month's net capital inflow go backwards out of China.
Okay, so describe that. So tell us how many millions are in your fund now, and compared to like VEA or one of those.
Oh, we're tiny. We're like, on the order of $5 million right now, still growing, right? But we've only been around for a year. People are watching us, trying to see what we're doing.
Yeah.
The Vanguard funds are, on the order of $100 billion.
Okay.
Right. So, but Vanguard's the big daddy out there, right? And for good reason, they do good work. But yeah, if we grow to those sorts of scales, we could really create a lot of incentives in the authoritarian world. If you start seeing massive amounts of capital coming out of all these different authoritarian countries, and they start going through the 60 questions in the democracy index to figure out how to improve their score, like North Korea doesn't actually have any publicly traded securities. But if they did, they get a non-zero democracy score because they have a good literacy rate and they already have 10% women in government. And they could go look and see, hey, if they got to 20% women in government, they'd improve their score, right? And that for North Korea, I think, is doable. And there's a lot of doable things out there for a lot of countries if they thought to even look at the democracy index and try to improve their score. And so we're trying to create that sort of incentive structure to try to slowly pull the authoritarian world towards democracy.
What are you doing to market this fund so that you can grow your assets quicker?
Finding advisors like you, Cathy. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're doing. People that care about aligning their portfolios with their values. And it's we have, and as Rick said, we have a lot of people watching us. And now that we've hit the 1 year mark, we're cautiously optimistic for some serious momentum now, especially given the state of the world.
What are the risks in investing in a fund that is growing? A small fund that's growing. Are there risks in that?
It's an exchange traded fund, so it's completely liquid. You can get in and out anytime. It's also a very tax efficient vehicle, which is why we chose to do an ETF.
Yeah.
No, we're a mission driven company. We're here to shift capital flows. We're trying to change the game. And we have an exclusive license to the Economist Democracy Index for financial products globally. So no one else can use that index for this type of strategy.
Okay.
We own that.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I have one last question about the structure. So Chris, this would be for you. So right now your top holdings are regional or country specific ETFs.
Correct.
And over time, will you shift out of that into individual stocks, and why? Can you explain the
yeah, sure. Be happy to. So the index, as I mentioned before, has about 2,400 names in it.
Okay.
And at our current asset level, to buy those to do full replication of that index is very inefficient when you figure in trading and custody costs for small Israeli firms or small Pakistani company or what have you. So what we've done is we've used a series of regional and country-specific ETFs along with individual securities largely from the Eurozone. But we've got about 17 or so ETFs in the portfolio that give us that exposure right now. As we get larger, the idea will be to unwrap those ETFs. So if we have a Japan ETF, and we get to a certain asset level where it becomes practical, we can unwrap that. We can unwrap that the Japan ETF or the Taiwan ETF or whichever. As we get to those levels and it becomes beneficial to the shareholder, we'll go ahead and unwrap those things.
All right. Well, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for your time. And if you'd like to add anything else, I'm happy to share the time. Otherwise, I'll put all your bios in the show notes, a link to your fund, and any other information that you want to share with me, I will add it to the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Thank you, Cathy.
And
this has been wonderful.
I wish you great success in building the assets in this fund.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. We wish you all the best in building your practice as well. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much.